to a really, I thought, one of the most telling slides that the FAA fellow had, Ralph Nicosia, from his near-ass study, the New England passenger demand by ground origin. This map, I think it's worth 1,000 words. You can see through all of New England where most of the passenger demand is concentrated. Each one of these little red dots represents 2,500 passenger trips in 2004. So most of those passenger demands are from the Boston area. You can see the Mass Pike corridor, 93 going north, 95, 95 coming south into Providence. And then there's a band coming up through the Connecticut Valley to Bradley, coming up from White Plains and Westchester and New Haven. But what's interesting is you look at places like Burlington, Vermont, or you look at Portland, Maine. You'd think Portland would be pretty solid, pretty good demand there, or Bangor. I mean, they have scheduled service in these places, big jets going in and out. But the Cape, the density of these dots is rather startling. There's quite a lot. In 2004, there was quite a lot here. I mean, it's like this little band going up into the Manchester area. That was eye-opening for us. There's a lot of people from the Cape that are mainly going through Boston and Providence right now to meet this demand. But that's a lot. What we did was we then looked at the regional context. Where does Barnstable fit in to that demand? And all those dots that we just saw was, in round numbers, 700,000 passengers in 2005. It grew a little bit. And that was just to Logan, to the domestic and international markets. And this is the key. A lot of the passengers from the Cape are going international. And Logan is the big international hub. The New England Regional Study forecasts that the Cape Cod need for air service will grow to 1.3 million passengers by 2020. 1.3 million from the Cape to those markets. And obviously not going to all go across the bridge to Boston or to Providence. So we need to start thinking about that in a regional way. How do we help satisfy some of that? Now, the forecasts that were developed for the feasibility study that SH&E did had a rather modest growth. There were roughly 177,000, 178,000 roughly in 2005. And they took that to a low of 220,000 and a potential high of 323,000 by 2025. So in 20 years, they're going from 178,000 to somewhere between 220 and 323. 323 even isn't very much when you consider there's 1.3 million coming from the Cape. But anyway, that's a fairly conservative number that they were using. To compare that to Nantucket, which we feed. I mean, Nantucket gets 80% of their passengers from us. Their forecast was 2 of 49, so they get, in addition to the passengers we're sending, they get a lot from New York and Boston direct. But that's forecast to be 400,000 by 2025, or a high of 500,000. So a lot more out there, and they're not benefiting from this blob that's down here on the Cape. That's just Nantucket traffic. So what we did was we looked at what Hyannis's passenger trend had been. We charted it. Tried to do what the stock market does. But anyway, we had a high around in the late 80s, early 90s, and then it went down on a fairly steep decline and came back up again in a fairly long, gradual increase. So 2001, 2002, we started to take a hit and started going down again. So if we were to take that low number and take it out to 220 by 225, 220,000, or potentially 323,000, you can kind of see if you take this curve and you stick it on here that could come back up again. And we might look at something like this, and it may go off again, or could flatten out more. It's hard to tell, but I mean, it's plausible. Somewhere in this band is what we're going to be doing in 10, 20 years at this airport. So with that, we then looked at the InterVista's report, and they looked at that same set of numbers, and they looked at the feasibility of restoring the jet service that we used to have here, and or expanding the turboprop service that Dan Wolf had mentioned, maybe doing with his ATRs or something else, with 40 to 90 seat regional aircraft. And they identified, InterVista's identified 5 different potential markets. Continental could fly to Newark, which is kind of what they're doing now, but they could do more of it. JetBlue could go to JFK, they're doing that now from Nantucket. US Airways, who we have here now, could go to Philly with bigger aircraft, higher frequency. United could come in and go to Washington Dulles. That would be huge, because a lot of people here are going to the DC area, or better yet, get Atlanta to go to get Delta to go to Atlanta. Any of those would be potentially feasible given the market, even in its conservative low end. So, and again, this would only restore the service that Northeast, and this airplane was here in 1972. That was parked out front. Northeast flew back and forth. That's a DC-9 or now 717, but they were here back then. So those findings from those 3 reports all seem to come together and corroborate the fact that there's a potential here for that kind of service, whether it's the new quiet turbofans or turboprops. That could happen. What we then did, because what we're interested in is, okay, what does all this mean from the standpoint of planning for facility improvements here on the airport? And basically the first thing is, well,